this cannot be one of those crazy, bizarre UFO cases. But, but what if it is? They found strange scars on their body, scoop-like marks, semicircular marks on their body that they knew. These were not there before. They had these strange dreams of these small grey creatures coming into their dream world. He said, I desperately wanted to punch these wee guys, but I couldn't move a muscle apart from my eyes.
Malcolm, it is such a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me on your show, Christina. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. When I talked about the Dechmont Law Incident in Scotland on my show a few weeks ago, I highlighted your book and your research, and it's so exciting to see that you've been studying UFOs for decades now, looking at all sorts of fascinating cases and theories. And before we get into your research, we have to start from the beginning. You've been into the strange and the mysterious since you were a child. How did you get interested in that when you were so young, and how did it steer you in the path that you're in today?
Well, I've always been interested in strange phenomena ever since I was a small boy growing up in Scotland. I always had this fascination for all things weird and wonderful. And I started to read the books of Charles Berlitz, and I also watched the American TV shows coming over, movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still, The War of the Worlds. And these fascinated me. And as I say, I started to read books on ghosts, poltergeists, UFOs, and I went, no, there's no substance to this. There's no such things as ghosts and UFOs. It's a load of rubbish. And I set out in 1979 on a one-man crusade to disprove these subjects. But it's like anything else in life, Christina. Once you get your hands dirty, once you put yourself in that ballpark of weirdness, you soon find out that there's no smoke without fire. And I've been slapped by nothing. I've had my hair pulled by nothing. And I've seen some astonishing things. And when you see these things, obviously you come off the proverbial skeptical fence. And it's been a wonderful journey. I'm still enjoying this fantastic ride of the paranormal that I've been on, And so needless to say, I'm not a skeptic anymore. Having said that, I'm still skeptical with my society in every single case we go into. You've got to be skeptical. You've got to ask all the right questions. And that's what we do, yeah?
That's so exciting. And while you've been doing this for almost 50 years, I can just tell that the passion is still there, the interest is still there. And you're right, when we're doing and researching any topic, we have to remain skeptical. But there's a very big difference between being a skeptic and being a debunker. One's open-minded and the other one is not. But over the years, doing the research, have you ever had an encounter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I put myself into the ballpark, I've seen a lot of strange things. And if we move into the UFO camp for a moment, funnily enough, I was doing research at Loch Ness because I've been fortunate to go down in a submarine in Loch Ness. And on this particular night, we were at a campfire at Invermoriston on the shores of Loch Ness, and we were sitting enjoying the lovely Scottish scenery, a starlight sky, oh, beautiful night. And I was sitting with Canadians and Americans, and we were just, chewing the fat. And then suddenly, this lady shouted up, "What's that? What the hell is that?" And we all looked across over the surface of Loch Ness, and the hills, you could see the hills, the silhouette of the hills in the distance. And you could see this ball of white light, which should not have been there, majestically moving in the heavens and stopping, then moving left, moving right. We knew it wasn't an aircraft or a helicopter. We knew it wasn't a satellite or anything like that. And then suddenly after it stopping, it just zoomed off into the sky and was gone. Now, like any UFO case, Christina, we check with the airports, both local, national. We check with the local flying clubs, the Met Office to see if there were any release of weather balloons. We check with the police to see if any members of the public had notified their station and said, well, we've seen something as well. So effectively, we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's just to ensure, well, what could have it been? we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find anything that was the reason for this bizarre sighting, you know. But probably one of the earliest sightings that I had was probably when I was about 10 or 11 years of age, and we were playing football, or soccer, as you would say in America and Canada, in a school playing field and kicking about. It was a lovely, beautiful day. And then everybody stopped playing football and we looked up in the sky. And it was an egg-shaped object about the size of 20, 30 feet on its side. And again, we're young, but we knew this, what is that, you know? And after a period of time, my friends started playing football again. And I took my gaze off it. And then when I looked back up, it had completely disappeared. So even then, these strange things were afoot, you know. And this was a time when I was looking at, you know, Star Trek and all these movies and reading my books. And it kind of fueled the fire. It fueled the passion towards all things weird and wonderful. And over the years, I've seen many strange things. And Bonny Bridge is a hotspot or a window area which seems to attract a higher concentration of UFOs than anywhere else. I mean, we have it in Gulf Breeze and Pensacola and Florida and various locations. And we've seen some very bizarre, weird lights and things dropping down from the sky and moving around in the farmland, you know, in the fields, etc. So, yes, I've seen a lot of strange stuff over the years, and hopefully we'll see more.
Talking about Bonny Bridge, why do you think it's a hot spot? Is there any weird material in the area? Is it located near some place that gives it that strangeness to it? What do you think is going on there?
Well, that's a big question, Christina, because we truly don't know is a bottom line answer. There's no air bases there. There are no military bases there. There's nothing overly significant that would warrant any questioning eyes from elsewhere to come and have a wee look. It's a rural landscape. Bonny Bridge is only about 9,000 inhabitants. And it's not just Bonny Bridge itself. You've got towns like Falkirk, Slamanan, Larbert, little wee towns there. But it's seen a multitude of strange aerial craft over the years, from your classic flying saucer shape, you know, like two soup plates joined rim, to your balls of light. We've had strange craft, like even shaped like a Toblerone box, moving silently and slowly across the night sky. We've also seen the large black triangular shaped objects. But I'll just give you a quick, for instance. I mean, there was a gentleman driving to Stirling from Denny. It's a small place near Bonny Bridge. And in his car was his two young sons, and it was night time. And they were driving along the road. And then suddenly his son screamed out, "Dad, Dad, what's that?" And his father, who was steering the car, of course, looked to the left through the windscreen, and he saw this like a hat-shaped object, you know, like not like a bowler hat, but more kind of flat at the top. And it had three green lights on its underside. And he went, "Well, this is peculiar. You know, it's like any close proximity sighting. They know this is not an aircraft or a helicopter." He knew that straight away. But this is where it gets strange, Christina, because immediately in front of the car, about 20, 30 yards away, was this instantaneous, like a fog bank. Although it wasn't a fog bank, it was sharply defined, like a sheet of paper on his side of the road. And he went, what's this? So as the car went through this fog bank or whatever it was, he felt like silver pinpricks of light just falling all over his head and his shoulders. And the children were screaming, you know, and he didn't stop, and he just raced to his destination of Stirling to pick up his wife. And that's just one of many bizarre sightings. Another one was this gentleman was driving towards a Castle Carry viaduct. It's a big railway viaduct, you know, the big arches, Christina, big arches. And as he's driving towards this, he saw one of those large black triangular objects hovering about 20, 30 feet above the surface, the parapet of this railway viaduct. And then a second similar object was point to point right above this parapet. He slowed down And as he slowed down, other motorists were slowing down as well. And you could see everybody's peering through the windscreen, looking up at these things. And then they just went like that, whoop, whoop, straight up into the sky and was gone. And we've checked again with the police and the airports, and there were nothing in the sky at that time. And then we have two photographs from that area. One is called the Polmont Reservoir photograph, of which these two men were setting up their tripods to take some photographs of this petrochemical refinery plant, this massive big area with burning gas, plumes of gas going up into the night sky. And as they were setting up the tripod to take this, it's like a city, it's like Las Vegas, all the pipes and everything. They became aware of this red object moving towards their person. And then it was about 200 feet above their heads. And they had to bend over backwards because it was coming down towards them. And the gentleman took one photograph. And in that photograph, you see the underside of this craft, whatever it may be. It was concave underside, glowing red, and it was throwing out a band of white light. Now, again, skeptics said that they'll say that could have been taken anywhere. And we've got to agree with that, because at the end of the day, not only are we dealing with witness testimony, but it's great to have backup of video footage, of photographic footage. We're living in the Steven Spielberg age of DreamWorks Laboratory, where anything can be manipulated onto a computer. But thankfully, the same process can be applied to determine if it was a model suspended by a thin wire or a string. So it works both ways, that technology. I would not be in this field of study, Cristina, if I honestly didn't believe we're dealing with something real, something tangible, something off-Earth. Well, when I say off-Earth, but it may have bases in the oceans of this planet. But we're dealing with something real, for sure. Absolutely.
Do you think it's easier or more difficult to research UFOs today with the technology that we have, being in the Spielberg era?
Well, it's yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, more and more people are being aware that we do have a recognizable phenomenon in the skies. We have cameras galore. It's easy to manipulate photographs. Of course it is. We have some fantastic video footage as well. And so I wouldn't say it's overly, for me personally, I think we're in a good area. Now, when we look at what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years, we have the USS Theodore Roosevelt, USS Princeton. We have these F-18 Navy pilots that was dispatched to find out what the hell is going on in this exercise, because all these ships are doing this exercise off the coast of San Diego. And these objects, the tic-tac, the go fast and the gimbal, if that's our own technology, by God, why are we not implementing that for our own use, Because the G-force involved by the swift stops and turns is astronomical. So for me, it's not the Chinese, it's not the North Koreans, I don't think it's, our own technology. It's something again off-world, yeah.
After talking about the Dechmont Law Incident, you were one of the first people to get and do boots on the ground investigations to talk to the witness Robert Taylor in Scotland. And what's fascinating about that case, and we're going to mention this quite a few times, is that it was the first alien encounter that turned into a criminal investigation in Scotland. Now, Scotland's been a first for quite a few different things. But my question is, what made you decide that case nearly immediately rather than just waiting for someone else to do it?
Well, admittedly, there was another researcher with boots on the ground at that time, a gentleman by the name of Stuart Campbell, who I mentioned in my book. And of course, Stuart came up with the various explanations to account for what he believed transpired, one of which was black ball lightning and a mirage of Venus. But I was there the day after the event, and I saw the marks on the ground. I interviewed Robert Taylor. I interviewed the police officers. And it became apparent to me that this wonderful, wonderful man would never in a million years dream up a scenario of this nature. He didn't want this to happen in his life. He was a war hero. He went over to France in D-Day 5. He helped liberate Bergen-Belsen. And after the war, he settled in Scotland. And he was employed by the Livingston Development Corporation in the Forestry Department. So when he went into Dechmont Woods on November the 9th, 1979, he wasn't expecting that. He was not expecting that. Gets out of his truck. I won't go into the story too much, you've already gave it for anybody tuning in not aware of the story. He got off his pickup truck, he walking down this forestry ride, trees to the left, trees to the right. He was accompanied by his Irish red setter dog, Lara, came upon a clearing and went, oh my God, what is that? He saw this large dome-shaped craft with a flange going around its perimeter, cross-light projections sticking up in the flange, then it would disappear and re-solidify. You could see the young trees in the background, and his dog was barking furiously beside him. And then suddenly, as if the event couldn't get any more bizarre, it did. What resembled two Second World War sea mines dropped down from beneath the craft, impacted on the grass and started rolling across the grass. They stopped and projected these projections towards his person, ripping his trousers, which I have here. These are the actual trousers that Robert Taylor wore on that eventful morning of November the 9th, 1979. That is the left leg tear on the trousers. If I move over to the right leg, hopefully you can see that there. We have a tear on the trousers there. Now, these trousers, as you said in your programme, thank you for mentioning it, were analysed by the police forensic department in Edinburgh by a gentleman by the name of Lester Knibb. And he said to me, he says, Malcolm, these trousers were ripped in a mechanical upwards manner. They were not ripped by any forest debris, any sharp stones or twigs. And I remember Robert Taylor, he said, Malcolm, how I wish you had been there. How I wish you had been with me to see this incredible sight. And then he went on to say, if only my dog could talk, which was good. But what a case, And that came early in my career. That came in 1979. I was only 22 years of age then. And it was a catalyst for me trying to understand the complexities of this interaction by this strange craft from goodness knows where. There's 11 different theories that I mention in my book, because even though I believe wholeheartedly we're dealing with a non-human intelligence, in any of my books, I always try to look over the fence and provide what the skeptic would say. So we have 11 different theories to account what may have happened. Do I believe any of them? No, I don't. I honestly believe that Robert Taylor was either in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. But by God, what a case that was.
There were a lot of questions when I did that show of what happened to the dog? What happened to Laura after the incident?
Well, what happened to Lara was this. Robert Taylor took the dog back up to the woods, and when he approached that location, the dog backed away. It refused to go back to that location, and it never ever went back to that area with Robert Taylor. Having said that, the family decided to actually bury the dog. When the dog sadly passed away, the dog is buried in Dechmont Woods, but not at that location, at another area of the woods. And we have to bear in mind that UFOs were sighted the week prior to Robert Taylor's encounter and the week after. Then only in the last year, an incredible story came to my attention by a gentleman who said, Malcolm, a few years after Robert Taylor's case, a good few years, him and his friend had these big, large, husky dogs, and these dogs are not frightened of anything. And they were walking into Dechmont Woods. Now, it wasn't anywhere near that particular area. I've got to say that. It was still in Dechmont Woods. So he's walking with his friend and all their dogs, and then suddenly the dogs stopped and backed up, and they started baring their teeth. And he went, well, what's going on here? My dogs never react like this. And then about 20, 30 yards away, I'll tell it the truth, this is what he said. He says, Malcolm, I saw a figure, a humanoid figure, but the face was like a dog face, like a dog man, with burning red eyes and a kind of snout, and it had shaggy hair or fur, and it kind of stared him out, and his dogs just backed off, and then suddenly this thing just took away at lightning speed. So Dechmont Woods has got a history of animals disappearing, dogs particularly, and also UFO sightings and a whole range of other things. It's a very, very weird situation.
It is, and I think it's also strange how you gained possession of Mr. Taylor's trousers. What's the story behind that? Did you just ask, be like, "Hey, can I have your pants?" Like, how did that conversation go?
Well, after the investigation by the Police Forensic Department, they were handed over to the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, in London, England, and were given to a good friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Philip Mantle. Now, Philip said to me a few years after he received the pants, he says, "Malcolm, you're Scottish, they should be with you." And so he gave them to me, and that's how I got them. I've taken them on tours, I've taken them on lectures. A few years ago, I was offered thousands and thousands of dollars by an American businessman to sell them, but I wouldn't do it, Christina. These trousers, and I've often said that these trousers are like the Turin threads of ufology. Not the Turin shroud, but the Turin threads of ufology. Now, yes, you know, we have this wonderful case, but it's great to have an artifact of these trousers because you very, very rarely get that, you know. And to his dying day, Robert Taylor says, "Malcolm, this happened. I saw this." And the problem we have is of course, with any researcher will tell you this. The problem we have is why? Why? What is going on here? What is causing these sightings? And this is one of these $1 million questions that I sadly can't answer. I can give you speculations galore, but this is where we get into the UFO abductions. That worries me. That concerns me. And you know, Scotland has its own massive abduction case, which, if we have time, I'd love to tell you about.
We're actually going to get into that one next. Are you referring to the A70 UFO incident? Talking about that one?
Yes, I certainly am. Yes.
So, you wrote a book on it, and what I found interesting is that here's another first. It was the first officially reported UFO abduction. How does it stack up against other abduction stories that you've dug into?
It stacks up very well. It has similarities, but it also have differences. It's a massive case. I'll try and be brief, but August the 18th, 1992, Gary Wood and his friend Colin Wright were driving from Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. And as you leave Edinburgh and you travel down the A70 road, you come into farmland, fields to the left, fields to the right, vegetation, farmland. There's no houses or nothing, you know. And as they're driving down this, it's about 10:30 or so in the evening, and it was fairly dark. And Colin, who was in the passenger seat, said to Gary, "What the hell's that?" And as they looked through the windscreen of the car, they became aware of a two-tiered, black, shiny, disc-shaped craft hovering 20, 30 feet above the surface of the road. And I keep saying it, but it's true. They knew this isn't a helicopter or an aircraft. What is this, you know? So rather than stop the car and go back, if you can imagine, I always do this when I talk about the case. So this hand is a UFO, this hand is a car. As the car was directly underneath this hovering object, thousands upon thousands of tiny pinpricks of sparkling white light descended from beneath this craft and impacted the car. And as it did so, both men were enveloped in total and inky blackness. They could not see the dashboard of the car. They could not see each other. Are we dead? That's what they thought. Are we dead? What's this? And then thankfully they regained their sight. The car was on the right-hand side of the road, which over in America is your normal side. To ours, it's the wrong side because we drive on the left. But the car was on the other side of the road. I had to pull the steering wheel back to the left, and they drove to their destination. And they knocked on the occupant's door. No answer. No answer. And eventually the lady of the house opened a window and says, "Well, what time do you call this?" "What do you mean?" "You're an hour and a half late." Now, you know, it's the journey should only have taken about 30, 35 minutes, Christina, and they're an hour and a half late. So they proceeded to tell occupants of the house what they had seen. They got laughed out of court. And that night and subsequent nights thereafter, they found strange scars on their body, scoop-like marks, semicircular marks on their body that they knew. They knew that these were not there before. And they had these strange dreams of these small grey creatures coming into their dream world. And Gary said, oh no, surely that's not this cannot be one of those crazy, bizarre UFO cases. But what if it is? Who do you go to? And his wife did not believe him. They got ribbed mercilessly by workmates. So he went into the local library, picked up a book by Jenny Randalls, and our organisation's address was in the back. And long story short, I says, guys, I was on the phone. I says, guys, do you want to be hypnotically regressed to see if perhaps something else may have happened that night? And I went, Malcolm, please, we need to do something because nobody believes us. And yes, I know that people can lie under hypnosis. There is something known as cryptonesia. You've read as a small girl or a small boy, you've read a book about aliens and that's suppressed. And then somehow it comes out into your mind and you think it happened to you. So I was aware of that. So I've just told you what happened, the conscious recall, the craft, the sparkling lights. This is what happened under hypnosis. The car was stopped. They were approached by several small grey beings. They were taken out of the car. Now, you mentioned your question earlier was the similarities, etc. Here's one of the differences. Gary was placed on what appeared to be a stretcher, a flat stretcher. But no, these beings were not holding it. Why the need for this? They were taken on board this craft. They were stripped completely naked. Gary found himself on a flat raised table and he was subjected to some form of medical or clinical procedure. He says, Malcolm, it was like somebody's hand was inside my stomach and pulling all my entrails. The pain was immense. And he saw these two grey creatures standing at the foot of this flat raised table, one of which was holding a diamond kind of pendant, moving it over his legs and around his body. And when he looked above him, he saw this black lens-shaped circular thing about 2 feet spinning about. Then he saw this can-shaped device coming up from the floor and this lever coming up like that with 2 red LED lights, and it started to spin around his head. What was it? Was it a medical device? Who knows? But probably one of the most interesting things that he said to me, and he said this, he says, Malcolm, I couldn't move a muscle. He said, I desperately wanted to punch these wee guys, but I couldn't move a muscle apart from my eyes. And I looked down on the floor and I saw this young 17, 18-year-old girl, completely naked, with her knees up under her chin, with her arms around her knees. And she gently turned her head and looked at me and she had tears running down her eyes. And he says, Malcolm, I'll never, ever forget the sadness, the forlorn, the despair in this young girl's face to the day I die. Colin, on the other hand, he found himself encased in this glass or perspex chamber. If you can imagine a man's cigar tube, it's only about, so many inches, about that. But this is about 8 feet tall, glass. Colin is completely naked, he's strapped down, and he could only move his eyes, but to the left and to the right, he could see similar males and females, from young people, middle-aged people, elderly people, all in states of undress in these containers as well. And later on, Gary passed a BBC lie detector test. And I remember when his wife, they're not married now, but his wife at the time, she always thought her husband was off his head. Until one night she phoned me. She gave me a telephone call and she says, Malcolm, I was reading a book. I was in bed. I was reading a book. Gary was next to me. He was sleeping. I was reading the book, closed the book, put the book on the bedside table, switched off the bedside light, and about 30 seconds later, small, childlike hands grabbed my ankles and pulled me forcibly down the bed. And whereas my head was on the pillow, it's now halfway down the bed. I looked and I saw 3 small grey figures waddling through the wall and disappeared. It was incredible. But I've only scratched the surface of that case. There's so much more.
Yeah, that is insane. Not only the amount of details that you've provided so far, but the fact that the wife didn't believe her husband and then it happened to her almost as a form of punishment. That's kind of what it what it looks like. And I can't even imagine that level of fear because your home, especially your bedroom, is your sanctuary. It's your safe space. Nothing bad should ever enter your bedroom, minus a few nightmares from time to time. So for that to happen, that's really scary.
One night he woke up in bed and he was astonished to see a small grey being at the foot of his bed. This is a good few years after the event, and he went, right, okay, I've got you now. This is my domain. Gary jumped out of bed, ran towards this little grey, and smacked him one. And this little grey done a somersault and stood up and rushed towards Gary, and an explosion of light transpired, and Gary was knocked unconscious. Another scenario happened again some years after the event. Gary was driving away from Edinburgh and was in the car with his two sons. And then suddenly, this tremendous ball of light came over the hood of the car, penetrated the windscreen of the car, and then engulfed the whole car. And Gary said to himself, oh no, 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 not again, not with my children in the car, please no. And then suddenly it just dissipated. This light dissipated, and thankfully nothing else happened, But this is Scotland's first reported, as you said, UFO abduction. There may well be others, Christina, but as yet we've not learned of these. And this traumatized these guys. And this is why it infuriates me with abductions worldwide, because they're saying that they're taking sperm and ova from males and females to repopulate a dying planet. Well, I don't generally believe that, because you've got to understand, they've been doing this now for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Surely they've got enough genetic material that they don't need to do this. Is it something else? Is it they're looking for our souls? I honestly think that maybe planet Earth is a zoo, that they seeded us here, that maybe it's not the origin of the species by Darwin, what he's saying. Maybe we are an experiment, but again, that's only speculation on my part, only speculation.
There's been a lot of theories on that of planet Earth being a farm or a zoo and using people's not only DNA but sperm and eggs as well to sometimes some ideas are to repopulate or to use them as slaves. And there's just a handful of different ideas. And it seems that no matter how long we've been researching this topic, no matter how many people we've spoken to, it's sad that it's still just a speculation, that we don't have the answers yet, that we haven't had a full-blown interview with these people or entities to get our questions answered. With that being said, there are a handful of abductions that some people find positive, but most of them are usually negative encounters. In your opinion, do you think these entities are benevolent or malevolent? Are they our space brothers here to cure cancer and save the planet? Or do they have their own agendas and don't care about human life?
Well, great question, great question. There is an agenda. Absolutely, there is an agenda. But what is that agenda? I mean, when we look at the famous Maureen Puddy case in Australia, she was seeing UFOs a lot. She claimed she was abducted, and then these two Australian researchers joined with her in her automobile, in her car, and they drove to a location. And Maureen went, they'll be here soon. They'll be here soon. I can feel it. And the two investigators are in the back of the car. She's at the driving wheel, the steering wheel. And then suddenly she says, they're here. I'm going now. I'm going. But she never went anywhere, Christina. She was still in the car. Now, can we speculate? Maybe it's the etheric body they were taking, the spirit body of the person, as opposed to the physical body. I mean, I'm a spiritualist. I firmly believe in life after death. The evidence, again, for that is overwhelming, and we could go into that for hours. So, again, that's a speculation part for me, that she was still sitting there, but they took her spiritual body and did something with it. I would like to think that we're getting closer. They say disclosure's getting closer because NASA was looking into this recently. We have as I mentioned before, the USS Theodore Roosevelt. We have all these Navy and Air Force personnel coming forward and telling what's going on. So clearly there's something up here. And I think now the American government do recognise that they're dealing with something real. And it more or less said that just last year. And under the Freedom of Information Act passed initially in America, many pre-classified government documents came out which clearly showed that the NSA, the FBI and the CIA were actively involved in UFO research. The same here in the United Kingdom. Many pre-classified government documents from Whitehall has been released. The problem I've got with that, Christina, and I've said it on other shows, that a lot of these A4 sheets are heavily blacked out, paragraph after paragraph. What is behind that? What is behind these paragraphs? But and I'll say it again, that please recognise that a lot of what's seen in the skies is our own black budget technology. And I honestly believe that some of these strange craft has been sighted as our own technology, but not them all. I would not be in this field of study if I didn't genuinely believe that we're dealing with something real and something tangible. But certainly in the 1950s in America, when they were test flying these SR Blackbird and various other prototype craft, that gave rise to many false UFO reports. And the American government and military were more than happy for the ground-based observer to think, yeah, it's a UFO, and it wasn't. But we're still dealing with something real. We really, really, really are. And Scotland, as a nation, has seen a wealth of strange craft flying in its skies, and it's just one of these mysteries that entices you to be involved in this, Christina. You love the subject as much as anybody else, and it's just wonderful to be on your show to talk about a few of these cases.
Thank you. And you bring up something interesting about how there's been a lot of misidentification, that some of the things that we're seeing in the sky could be black project military aircraft. And I'm being so honest here, in 2025, like, we're living in the future. We should be having flying saucers by now, but it should be public knowledge. And if we're behind on that, of course, I'm raising an eyebrow of, seriously, with all of the advancements that we've made, we still can't replicate, these UFOs that have been seen over the centuries. So it would be disappointing, if anything, to be honest. But it's sad that the public isn't aware or familiar with these projects that are happening behind the scenes, really confusing and convoluting the topic and the conversation of UFOs, which is now the term is drones. Oh, what you saw was a drone. It wasn't a UFO, but it will never be the answer of, oh, what you saw was a military project. That will never be the conclusion, at least not anytime soon.
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, the American government and the military machine do want these classified government projects to be maybe misconstrued as a fanciful flying saucer, because it takes the weight of what it truly is. And,
Right.
people, even though people say to me, Malcolm, why are you saying it could be military? Because they seem to think that because I do believe in these subjects, that they're surprised that I look over the fence and look at the black budget project. But we have to be honest and real about this, But it's what's going on here. I mean, when we look at ancient caveman, when he looked out of his cave, he saw a rainbow. To him, that was a magical thing in the sky which he couldn't comprehend. Obviously, we now know what it is. Can you imagine Christopher Columbus going into a nuclear submarine? He would be bamboozled. This subject seems to be just 2-3 steps ahead of us. It looks like for every one step we're getting closer, we're about 3 or 4 steps backwards. And it's quite frustrating, because you're quite right. We don't seem to be getting any closer. Yes, NASA and the American government are looking very, very closely at these things now, which is great. But is it giving us any fantastic answers? I remember in 2001 at the press club in America, yeah, Stephen Greer and all these Army and Navy personnel, and they were coming forward and telling the truth about UFOs being seen over Maelstrom and the silos and the nuclear missiles being switched off. I went, yes, at last. And then suddenly it was yesterday's news. But why is not everybody interested in this? People, the young people of today are becoming more and more fascinated. They know that they're getting lied to. They know that what they read in the newspapers and online is not always the truth. And people like yourself and what your program tries to imply and showcase is that, listen, folks, we are living in strange times. You know, there are a lot of strange stuff going on. And this is why I love coming on shows like yourself, just to say, well, this is what's happening in Scotland, you know?
And I feel like Scotland is just always kind of brushed to the side. The US always takes center stage when it comes to really a lot of things, but specifically UFOs. So to hear the the cases that are taking place in Scotland, you are the man to talk to on this. And with that being said, there are so many things that have happened in Scotland, so many reported UFO sightings. But is there a case that totally flipped your understanding of UFOs or even the paranormal? And what was it that just hit you so hard?
Well, I mean, there's certainly the A70 case was a big one, for sure. The Dechmont Woods was a big one as well. But I think what surprised me was there was a gentleman who was out near Craig Luscar Reservoir, another reservoir, and near Dunfermline in Fife in central Scotland. And he was there to take photographs of this beautiful scenery and this lovely reservoir. And from the photographs, he was going to paint because he was an artist. You know, he was really a good artist. So he went there and he suddenly became aware of a buzzing sound, like a sound of bees, a multitude of bees, maybe about 20, 30 yards away. And he initially thought maybe it's the electricity pylons, you know, those big pylons that traverse the earth. And because sometimes you get a low resonance hum if you stand underneath this, and then maybe it's that. And this sound was getting bigger and bigger. And then he just stopped and he looked and he was amazed. Here was another two-tiered object, only this time it was silver. A two-tiered object, shaped like a hat in the sky. And he went, wow, what is this? And then suddenly it was encased. It was like in a Victorian bell jar. You know these stuffed animals you got in Victorian bell jars? He couldn't hear a sound. He couldn't hear the bird song nearby. He couldn't hear the rumble of the traffic in a roadway, maybe about a quarter of a mile away, a busy road. All the sounds stopped. He couldn't hear anything. It was just him and this object. And he couldn't take a photograph. He had the camera around his neck, but he felt he could not take a photograph. And then suddenly, and thankfully, he came out of this arena of whatever it was, and he managed to take his camera and he took 2 photographs. Now, he was a wee bit annoyed at this because the photograph he took shows the object much more flatter. In other words, he said, Malcolm, when I was looking at this object, it was fatter, but the top part telescoped into the main body of the craft. It flipped and just screamed away. These photographs and the negatives were sent to Ground Saucer Watch in Phoenix, Arizona, and various other establishments in America. And they said, well, we can't categorically say what it is, other than it's flying, that's about 25 to 30 feet. It's not a clay pigeon plate, it's not a discus, it's not any of these things. And this is why photographic evidence is so important as well, because it does back up the witness as well. Now, when you ask the question about, you know, some of the other stuff, are you also looking at the paranormal world? Shall I tell you a good story about that?
Yes, please.
My heart lies in the paranormal. I'm a spiritualist. I believe in life after death. And I'll try and give you this 2 quick stories. The first one was when I lived in England, a lady came along to my lectures and says, Malcolm, oh dear. I went, what? One of the leading surgeons is off his work through stress. And I went, well, it's a stressful job. He went, oh, you don't understand. I says, well, pray tell me. She says, this leading surgeon was in the hospital, walking down the hospital corridor, and he stopped. And he saw this elderly gentleman, this old man, and he said, Are you okay? I think so. I think so. And at that point, the surgeon's pager went off. Excuse me a moment, sir. And the pager said, you are wanted in the resource room. And he turned round to say cheerio or goodbye to the gentleman, but he'd disappeared. He presumed he'd walked through some of the hospital swing doors. So you may know where I'm going with this story, but there is a twist. So when the surgeon went into the resource room, who's on the bed with the paddles on the chest was the man he saw in that corridor. So here's the twist. They went to the closed circuit television cameras and rewound it, and you could see the surgeon walking down the corridor, stopping, looking up, talking to nothing at all. Nothing at all. So these stories, and we have this wonderful story and no video footage, was incredible. But when I lived in London, this lady came to one of my lectures and says, Malcolm, would you like to see dead people? I went, sure. So I went along to this house, and it was just a normal house. She took us upstairs to one of the bedrooms. All that was in this bedroom was this tall, slender cabinet with a small red ambient light on the top. And in the corner of the room was a black drape and a small chair behind it. And I says, what's this? Oh, we've got a psychic medium who's coming up, and he's going to go into trance, and spirit will come through and strange things will happen. I went, okay. So this man came up. He was looking very nervous, and I patted him down to make sure he was not secreting any devices and telescopic rods. And I also went
Smart.
around the walls. You got to do it, didn't you? So I checked on the walls. There were no hidden cavities. I put my foot on the floorboards. There were no hidden cavities. And then we sat 4 chairs in front of this drape in the corner. We strapped them with heavy Velcro to the chair, and we switched the lights off, but your eyes got adjusted to the red ambient light. Myself and my colleagues were looking at this black drape, and suddenly all these little bells, the sound of little bells is moving all over the air, and also the sound of male and female voices, young, old, they're coming from all over, under your chin, under your arm. And I'm thinking it's somebody throwing their voice, but clearly nobody was. And then suddenly, a face molded into the very fabric of this black cloth and pushed itself out 2 or 3 centimeters. Cristina, you could see the nose, the bridge of the forehead. It was horrible. And then the small chest of drawers, which I forgot to mention, there was also a small chest of drawers next to this black drape in the corner, started to vibrate. It floated up to the ceiling, came across the ceiling and floated and came down to my shoes. Now, this is what happened. It sounds funny, but I've got to tell what happened. A voice boomed out in the room. Was Mr. Robinson impressed by this? And I said, I'd be more impressed if you took it away. We shall see what we can do. So I made the cardinal sin, Cristina. You should never ever try and interrupt psychic phenomena from happening. It can harm the psychic. So I got my finger and I hooked it under the top lid of one of these 3-tiered chest of drawers. I says, right, on you go, take it away. 1 minute went by, nothing. 2 minutes went by, nothing. And then suddenly this chest of drawers, it was moving. Cristina, there were nobody to the left, nobody to the right. Nobody was lifting this thing. And I could not pull it. And then suddenly it just left me and rose up into the ceiling, traversed across the ceiling and came down and rested back to where it was before. And at that point, a terrific burst of cold wind pervaded the whole room. And you could see your breath icing up in front of you when you put out, exhaled, you could see this frostiness. It was incredible. So as far as the paranormal goes, and I've seen a lot of other stuff, that was the most strange and bizarre thing. The downside of that, Cristina, was, do we have evidence? Sadly not. The lady of the house says, Malcolm, I'm sorry, I don't want any infrared cameras, I don't want any sound recording, I don't want this. So whilst it's a lovely story, and by golly, I saw it, is it proof? Certainly proof to me. And I would only say to your lovely viewers that, do believe that these things can happen, because they do.
I find that kind of strange, though, that the owner of the house said no equipment to monitor it. What do you think her reasoning was for that?
Well, myself and probably other people might say, well, because there was some sort of shenanigans, there was something behind all this, there was some jiggery pokery or something going on. I don't think so, because I checked that room, we locked the door, and it's just so frustrating because all we're trying to do as researchers is get the evidence to Joe blogs, the little woman that's going into Walmart. We want to show you the evidence and say, look, have a look at this. It's difficult because they may say it's been conjured up on computer. I remember we were dealing with a haunted house in Scotland and nothing was happening. We're in this haunted bedroom, nothing was happening. And the same thing suddenly, bang, the room illuminated by thousands of tiny pinpricks of white light moving all over the room, all over the ceiling, all over your clothes. And I said to her psychic, what is this? And she said, Malcolm, come on, you should know it's pure psychic energy. I mean, it's wonderful, it's lovely. So it only lasted about 20 seconds, Christina, and we rushed towards the VCR cameras and we pressed stop, pressed rewind, and pressed play, and with fingers crossed, oh, please, you've got to have captured this, please. Blackness, and never caught it. So the field of ufology, the field of paranormal research can be frustrating. But when you look at some of the TV shows right now, there are people getting the electronic voice phenomena. We're getting a lot of strange stuff. Is it evidence of life after death? Some would say yes, some would say no.
When it comes to photographs and taking not photography, but videography and things like this, there have been so many reports of people with both with paranormal and UFO encounters where their film is completely blank, or they never took the picture, or they couldn't take the picture, or they weren't in the right mind, as if they were suffering from brain fog to take the picture or the video. And while all of this happens, it leads to a lot of skepticism of, oh, I don't believe you because you don't have the evidence. But what has to be maybe one of the biggest myths about UFOs in particular that drives you crazy? And why do you think people need to stop believing in it?
Well, I think, and I've said it before in other shows, that mankind seems to poo-poo things. They laughed at John Logie Baird, inventor of television. That will never work. It did. We laughed at Marconi. That will never work. It did. We laughed at the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. It will never get off the ground. It did. People tend to poke fun and laugh at things in science and medicine and a whole range of things. And we should never, ever poke fun at something that looks ridiculous just because it looks ridiculous. We should never, ever do that because we're learning all the time. Mankind is at the bottom rung of an enormously long ladder of understanding. We're trying to look at new sciences. We're talking about quarks, neutrinos, superstring theory. We're looking at dimensions. I honestly believe the dimensional field of which Jacques Vallée, the French astrophysicist, has written in his books, is where a lot of the phenomena lie. You know, they're flitting in and out of our dimensions. And we have to bear in mind that many UFOs have been sighted entering and exiting the oceans of this planet, more so around the island of Puerto Rico. And when we look at the Mariana Trench, one of the deepest pieces of land under the oceans in our planet, who knows? You know, we may have bases under the oceans of this planet, because when you look at USOs, unidentified submersible objects, this is another criteria. They may already be here. They're not necessarily traveling thousands and billions of miles from deepest space. They may have a technology that's way superior to mankind, it's incomprehensible for us. It's like us trying to show a chimpanzee a computer, right? On you go, you try and work that out. We can't, because there's no comprehension here. I honestly believe we're dealing with something so advanced that we cannot understand it. You know, it's like I said earlier, you know, Christopher Columbus trying to work out a nuclear submarine. But that's the problem. It doesn't answer the main problem, and that is a why. That's the problem. Why the sightings? Why the abductions? And how we wish we had an answer to that.
And that's the hardest question to answer of what's the purpose? Why is it going on? What's the agenda? And does our perspective, our background in our environment affect the way that we see things? From your research, have you ever come across a case in Scotland in particular where there was a convergence between the UFO phenomenon and the paranormal, dealing with ghosts and poltergeists?
Yes, only one case springs to mind, and sadly it wasn't in Scotland, it was in Devon in England. And this lady had been seeing a lot of UFOs around her farmhouse, around her property. So myself and my colleague went down there to interview her. So we're interviewing this lady and she's talking away very nicely, and then she stopped. And I says, continue. No, you'll laugh at me. I went, no, we won't. We won't laugh at you. Anything you tell us, we've probably heard. Oh, I don't think I've heard this one. Tell us, please tell us. This is what she said, Christina. This answers your question. So we're there to interview her about the UFO sightings. She woke up one morning, she says, Malcolm, I wasn't sleeping. I was wide awake. The alarm had went off. I was ready to get up and do my daily court chores. And when I looked down at the foot of the bed, there was one of these small grey beings standing at the foot of the bed. I went, all right, okay. No, you don't understand. What? To the other side of the bed was a ghostly child. I went, really? She says, yes. She said it was like those little children you got in the American TV show Little House on the Prairie, with the pinafore dress and the ringlets in her hair. So you had a grey alien there and a ghostly child there. And that was an interaction. I says, is your house haunted? Well, yeah, I didn't really want to tell you about that, Malcolm, because you're here for the UFOs. But yes, we are seeing spirit things in this house as well. And that was quite bizarre, you know. So that was an intertwining, if you like, for want of a better word, of this. And that springs to mind just while I've got you here. This other case was in Scotland. And this was very bizarre. It was a case that Linda Moulton Howe spoke to me about quite extensively. Happened in Falkland and Fife. And it's a controversial case, big case. I'll be very brief. This lady and her friend and her daughter were driving to get a jar of coffee from a local shop. Now, this area is out in the sticks, you know, farmland again. And as they're driving towards the shop, fields to the left, fields to the right, they spied a large black triangular craft hovering off this small road. And coming from beneath of this craft was 2 to 3 white vertical beams doing a dance beneath it on the road, and went, oh my God, what's this? And then suddenly it went away. On the way back from the shop, the same or similar object came across the top of their car at a terrific speed. So much so that I should have said it was the boy that was in the car, not the daughter. The boy was in the car. He was crying his eyes out. So when they went back to the farmhouse, they said to the daughter, you'll never believe what we've just seen. One of those crazy UFO things. So the daughter refused to believe her mother. The daughter jumped in the car. They drove to near enough the same destination. And this big forest, they saw all these columns of light coming up, red, blue, and green columns of light coming up from this forest. And in front of this forest of trees was a big, long, elongated blue, misty light. And inside that and outside that was not 10, not 20, but she said upwards to about 100 small grey beings in this farmer's field, carrying boxes and cylinders towards a larger craft nestling in the woods. And she also said, well, they took fright at that. They jumped back in their car. Before they jumped in the car, they claimed to see these cocoons of like bubbles, like soap bubbles, but only about 4, 5, 6 feet tall. Encased within these bubbles were 2 small grey creatures coming across the farmer's fields towards their car. They jumped in the car and they sped off from the area. And as they did so, a tremendous burst of blue light pervaded the whole area behind the car. But this is where the spooky stuff comes in. When they went back to their farmhouse, there were ghostly phenomena occurring quite a lot as well. There was the dog's bowl. You could see the displacement of water as if an imaginary ghostly dog was licking it. So there were crossovers as there as well. So it makes you wonder what's going on.
I very recently had a Swedish researcher tell me a story in Sweden of people seeing little bubbles as well and entities inside of those bubbles. But in this case, they weren't grays, they were grumpy gnomes. Maybe because that's a cultural thing and perspective. But I have never come across a story like that until so recently with you and Fred Anderson. And I'm like, what's going on? I mean, out of all the ways to traverse space and time, you want to go in a bubble? It's cute, but is it effective?
It's so bizarre. This is why we love the subject so much, because it is so bizarre. Since I think I put this on my Facebook a few weeks ago, and two other cases came forward. One of which might have been the one you're on about, of small grey beings in bubbles. You mentioned it was like a dwarf or something like that, but these ones were small grey beings. Why? Why they need to be encased, encapsulated in this soap bubble? Is it some form of protection? You know, it's who knows, who knows. But this is what makes the subject so lovely to be involved with.
It does, because we're still asking the why questions. Why this? Why that? And compared to so many other topics, we're always hunting for those answers. Either we're never satisfied with the answers that we receive, or we just haven't found them yet. There's all these little breadcrumbs, all these little clues, and we can make our own conclusions however we wish, but we don't have like the evidence in our hands. And so I think that's one of the biggest driving factors, at least for myself, of that's driving that passion of you're always hungry for knowledge and information and the stories versus, for instance, like basic math addition of, okay, 2 plus 2 is 4. You can't question it. You can't ask any questions. That's the answer. But with these kinds of topics, you're like, okay, what happened here? What happened there? What was the environment? What was going on? Could it be this instead of this? Is perspective playing a role in this? It's so fluid compared to other things that we try to control in our lives that are so much more rigid. And I know that we're coming close to the end of our show, so I only have just one final question for you. And that is, if you could sit down with an alien and ask one question, what would it be?
It would be the why question. Absolutely why. Why are you coming to our planet, and what do you want? What do you want from mankind? That would be the question I'd ask. Why? What do you want from mankind? And
But would you be ready for the answer? What if it wasn't a good answer? What then?
I changed my trousers.
I can get that.
Good, good. Yeah, I mean, we got to find it. We must find out. We got to find out.
We do. Malcolm, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today. And a special thank you to all of my Patreon members that submitted questions for our conversation as well. And before we end today's show, Malcolm, where can people find you online to stay up to date with your research?
Yeah, they can find me on Facebook. Just type in my name, Malcolm Robinson. My books are available on Amazon. I've written 13 books, a combination of UFO books, paranormal books, and also a book on Loch Ness Monster. And so you can get my books online. And please, whatever you do, keep believing, keep looking at the skies, because this world of ours is a far more stranger place than we can ever give it credit for. Thank you.
And his links will be in the description box below. Malcolm, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoy the strange and the mysterious, UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids, this channel is for you. So make sure to subscribe, as I do 3 videos right here every single week, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss any of the bonus content I post right here.